I wanted to take this time to talk about the political parties Hamas and Fatah. In a previous video, I talked about my stance on the Palestinian-Israeli incident, and through my research, I looked a little bit into Hamas and Fatah. Now, we're all familiar with Hamas. They're the ones that are doing the militant protesting and the militant exercises against Israel. But Fatah is the political party that is looking over the West Bank, whereas Hamas is in Gaza. Now, for the longest time, the main face of the Palestinian resistance was Yasser Arafat, and he was a member of the Fatah party. Now, in my last video, I said that I'm not 100% on board with what Hamas is. I'm not saying I disagree with what they're doing, but when you understand the history of how Hamas came to be, you should be looking at it with a level of suspicion and skepticism. As Yasser Arafat said, Hamas is a creature of Israel. It was Hamas being, I guess, funded and armed by the Israeli government to fight specifically against Fatah. Now, what is Fatah? Fatah is a socially democratic, secular, national liberation party, whereas Hamas is an Islamist party. Islamist means that they want to have a religious ideological state, which basically means a theocracy. Now, given these two pieces of information, knowing that they were specifically funded and armed to fight Fatah, being a socially democratic party, and they are people who want to have a theocratic state, that already rings a lot of alarm bells in my head. Now, according to an Al Jazeera article that I read, I'm going to try to put the link in the comments, but according to Al Jazeera and explaining the difference between the two parties, they both want the same thing. They want the liberation of Palestine. And according to the article, they are fine with going back to the 1967 borders. But the main difference in their tactics, Hamas apparently is, well, obviously, is more favorable of using violence to achieve their revolution, whereas Fatah prefers to do negotiation. Now, as a socialist, I cannot condone the idea of a theocratic state. That already is going to cause a lot of problems, and if we were in a situation where Israel lost a lot of their power to the point where Hamas can now dictate how they want to run things, eventually it would turn into a fight between Hamas and Fatah, just like what happened in the beginning. But the issue is that even though I am more aligned with what Fatah is founded on, I don't agree with their ideas of negotiating their liberation. As we've seen throughout history, no real successful revolution was won by negotiation. It is always violence, and the violence is always started by the oppressors not wanting to actually work with the people who want to be socially progressive. As we've seen, it is the violence between Hamas and the Israeli government is what's woken us up finally to this 75-year conflict. We definitely should stand with the Palestinians and their fight for liberation, and to the point where Hamas is at least doing something for the Palestinians. But we have to remember, they want to have a theocratic state, which is ultimately just as repressive as the Israeli government, whereas Fatah wants to have a secular state. Now, given this situation, we have to learn from what happened with Afghanistan. Before the 1980s, the communist government of Afghanistan was a secular government, And the biggest mistake they made was they wanted to impose secular atheistic practices and legislature too quickly. And this is what radicalized the Mujahideen and the local people more against the government. Now, given the Mujahideen were Islamist extremists, and they wanted to keep their traditional values by oppressing women and the people, and the fact that a lot of the Mujahideen were funded by rich families and the United States government. So ultimately what I'm saying is we need to be highly skeptical of Hamas and their ultimate goal and what they would be willing to do when they finally achieve power. And we have to pay attention to Fatah. And if the time came where we would have to pick a side between Fatah and Hamas, Fatah ideologically is better because they want to have a secular nation.